Hi, my name's Bill O'Toole. I'm just going to talk about a course that I've just completed teaching. It's about events and strategy development. Uh, and I put together this really interesting system to explain it. It may help you in your careers. So I started the course off by talking about the event industry, the event sector around the world. It's hugely varied. People don't understand it. They tend to look at it from their own perspective, understandably. But there's sports events, there's festivals, there's concerts, and it touches just about every industry, mining, all kinds, banking, you name it. There are events there. So it's hugely varied, and because of that, the governments and companies are looking at strategic development of events. What does that mean? Well, it means over the long time, not just one event. It's events over a period of years, generally 5 years is strategic development. In other words, governments are looking at this and they're putting it as part of their policy. Now, when this happens, governments are focusing on events, okay? And how governments work on this is that they put together policy with objectives. And the objectives that we're generally interested in are the tourism objectives, the economic development objectives, and the community development objectives of a government policy. And you may find that they may be three very different strategies that the government has put out. And the thing is that the event impacts on all of these. Event impacts are generally on brand or goodwill, it's called, and an example of that would be Dubai Shopping Festival. It impacts on money, obviously, commercialisation. It's huge. I mean, when you think of some events can bring in millions of dollars over a period of 2 days in a country town, you can see the enormous impacts that events make financially. And then, of course, there's the social capital that events drive. And that can't be underestimated. And that's one reason that associations have events, is to keep the members. But there's a variety of reasons for that. Now, what's important about this is that each of those impacts actually are part of government policy, which means that you can get government support or at least permission. And the more you can do that, the more likely you'll get, you'll work your way through the governments and make sure that you get support. Anyway, so brand talks about tourism, obviously, economic development, and then you've got the social development. Now, this means that you can talk in government language. Okay, now another part of that is how is all this measured? Well, there are certain measurement tools that are used for this. The main one you need to know about is cost benefit analysis. And the next one is return on investment. Now, a few things about this. There are intangible benefits to events, but that doesn't mean they can't be costed, i.e., they can be costed. The benefits can be measured financially, even though they're intangible. The return on investment one is very important because the money is often upfront for an event. So you have to show that there will be a return on this investment. It may not be in the first year, it may be in years to come. So they're the measurement tools that are used for event impacts. Okay, and the impacts speak to the objectives, and the objectives are part of government policy. So it can be extremely complex, both for the government and for the events sector. And the solution to all of this is to treat events as assets. Asset management is a way of comparing events to other projects, which is what governments do. They can say, well, we're going to spend money on a bridge, or we're going to spend money on a tourism promotion, or we'll spend money on an event. Now, how do they choose between those two things? Well, they look at the impacts and how they affect the objectives, and they use measurement tools to do that. So, in fact, governments are already treating events as assets. They use the science of asset management, and you can find lots of information of this on the web. Generally, this is about physical assets, but these days, as you all know, with Google and Microsoft and all the rest of it, it's the intangible assets where the money is. Hence, intangibility is extremely important now. So asset management can be used for intangible things like events. Some of the tools are portfolio portfolio growth, which means that events are a series of events. It's not just one event, it's a series. You know, a local area will have a festival, it'll have concerts, it'll have exhibitions, it'll have conventions, it'll have sports events, and it'll have weddings and social events. Now, asset management treats that as a portfolio and says, well, which ones do we invest in? Which ones do we put money in? Which ones will we grow? Which ones will we get rid of? And that's called portfolio analysis, and it's all part of asset management. So all the tools are there waiting to be used by all the governments. Another interesting part of this is the concept of the event precinct. The events have to be placed somewhere. Hence, the governments are building places for events, and I'm not talking about convention centres and those sorts, but areas where events can happen, where festivals can happen, where concerts can happen. Obviously, the sports industry has been in front of this for many, many years, but now the governments are looking at other types of events and where they can be held. Now, in some countries, particularly the developing countries, these are cities. They're actually building event cities. In places like America, along the Ohio River, for example, they're turning some of the old industrial sites into event precincts. So this is another area where events as assets is very important, to treat events as assets and a portfolio of events. And then the question is, well, how do you evaluate them? Are they working? Well, fortunately, we already have the tools in asset management for evaluation and comparison, and there they are. Okay. It's the event impacts, the brand, etc. And you're using these measurement tools here, and all of them speak to the objectives, which is all part of government policy. And that's the system. Each one of these was a different lecture with different references, etc. And it's all put together into this system. One thing we've got to remember in all of this, although this is a system, and it's very sort of engineering approach, if you like, is creativity. We can't forget that, and we must remember that underneath all of this is creativity and innovation. Events are things that are out of the ordinary, and you've got to make sure that this is stressed in any course, that the creativity and innovation is very, very important and worth an enormous amount of money, as you well know. If you come up with a good enough idea for an event, you could sell it all around the world, and that could be your career. So never forget about the creativity side of it. To ensure that the attendees and students knew what was going on and everything was updated, because this is ahead of the curve, by the way, all this, what you're looking at here. This is not something that there's thousands of textbooks about and it's been around for years. This is progress. What you're looking at here is what all governments, local, state, and federal governments or national governments will do in the future. This is the what's called the maturity model, and this is the mature part of the model. So you'll see it happening in countries around the world. So if you get your head around it now, you'll be ahead of the curve and be able to offer your services. So each week I made sure I updated the new risks, and there's things happening around the world all the time. It's very important that the attendees and students, etc., are up to date on this stuff. It changes dramatically. Events change, and just look at the security situation, for example. And also, I'd make sure that I attended events each week and took photos and showed them what it was like. And it's important that they attend events. You cannot learn about events without going to them. Otherwise, you're just going to learn words and you won't really know how to do. And that's what we're after. How do you do, not just how do you speak? Okay, well, my name's Bill O'Toole. If you want any more information, send me an email by all means. Or you could get the book, Events Feasibility and Development. I put that out a couple of years ago, and it shows this model. And good luck with all your events.